Here I will share ways you can support students as they write found poetry in your classroom. Students can sometimes struggle with how to find the right words to create their poem. I encourage my students to, in the words of Catherine Keel, look for interesting words or phrases they enjoy. When first planning a found poem, students may find word webs useful. Encourage them to highlight and group words they particularly enjoy from the source text. As students reread a source text, they may wish to look for major themes or repetition that can guide their word selection. Thematic guidelines can assist students in the act of writing poetry. Consider asking students to summarize the plot of the text or describe a particular character through poetry. More creatively, ask them to use the source text to invent a character or scene that fits into the text. I often ask my students to discuss or write a brief reflection of their writing process for thematic poems, encouraging them to articulate why they chose to focus on a particular character or event. These poems can reinforce lessons on characterization and comprehension. The found poem on this page is titled Craigslist by Brianna Forney and reads, "For sale, broken down human, exposed to the illusion of brilliance." Taken from John Cleaver's short story, The Swimmer, the poem summarizes major themes of the story. I encourage my students to write found poems passionately. One of my favorite found poetry exercises asks my students to choose a book they dislike and write back to it. When we ask our students to take a stance or defend an opinion, they find words and phrases to defend their argument through found poetry. Ask students to write a poem that talks to a character or argues back to the author. Giving students topical guidelines can help them overcome resistance they may have about writing found poetry. I also encourage students to not feel limited by the topic of their text. Students may want to use the words of a text to write something with an entirely different meaning or approach than the source text. Writing outside of thematic or structural guidelines can be like solving a riddle or playing with words, and students enjoy being able to make something entirely their own. When students find a different meaning within a text, they push the boundaries of reader response, allowing for richer discussions and deeper understandings. I also invite my students to add visual elements to their found poetry, illustrating a scene or their poem, engaging multimodal responses to literature in new ways. You can adapt found poetry exercises to be more or less structured depending on the needs of your students. Consider providing structural guidelines, such as asking students to write haikus, a particular number of lines, or follow a rhyme scheme. There are pros and cons to formulaic writing. For more information on these pros and cons, check out the Literacy Teachers video titled How Formulaic Writing Can Support Student Learning. If students are struggling to write poems on their own, you can have students write found poems in small groups or pairs, letting them share ideas and collaborate on their work. You can also adapt found poetry exercises by your selection of the source text. Consider limiting source text to single pages from novels or shorter text like picture books. Providing a set selection of words can make found poetry less daunting for some students. I suggest you provide visual examples for your students so they can fully grasp the variety of ways they can write their found poems. Found poetry empowers our students, and it's fun to see their creativity in their work, so I like to try and inspire them by providing a variety of visuals and then let them make choices on how they create their poems.